easier. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. We're going to have a very interactive session. I want you to engage. If you want to ask something, don't wait for Q&A. Let's connect, let's engage, let's come together, and let's have as valuable a session as possible. And I want to use the session not to talk about strategy or disruption, but to really take some of what I do within the strategy space and apply it into personal strategy. Because I often say we're great at country strategy, at company strategy, at business unit strategy, but we never talk about personal strategy, which is an anomaly, right? Why is it that as organizations we love talking about strategy but not personal strategy? And so a big component of what I want to try and do today is a book that I've written that comes out in the next couple of weeks called Disruption Doesn't Knock. And it has been interesting in terms of how the publisher and I have engaged. The book was meant to be out in January, but every couple of days I go back to the publisher and I say, look, some of what I've said in this book has changed. And I really don't know when I'm going to get to a stage where I can give a view, but the view doesn't change fundamentally. And that is because it is beautifully encapsulated by Xi Jinping, who's the head of state of China. He argues the world is swept by a once-in-a-century transformation. And Martin Luther King is famous for saying in his prison cell in Alabama that the danger with revolutions is that the majority of people sleep through revolutions. And we're living arguably through one of the most revolutionary periods in human history. And when we live through revolutionary periods, either we are passive observer or we are active participant. And what I love about the world we find ourselves in is that the world is turbulent and will continue to be turbulent, but turbulence actually creates opportunity. And what is exciting about the world we find ourselves in is that no president, no prime minister, no CEO, no executive, no business school professor, even Shepherd Bushiri somewhere in Malawi, doesn't have the answers in terms of where we're going, right? It does mean we have this ability to have agency, to think about how do I operate in this type of world that we find ourselves in. And Peter Drucker beautifully puts it. He says, in times of rapid change, the learners will inherit the earth, while the learned will find themselves beautifully equipped with a world that no longer exists. And so part of that is to be able to start with provocation number one. How do I operate in a world that is changing in such a way that I understand this world? Because the more I'm able to understand it and make sense of it, the more I'm able to understand what role do I play in that type of context and in that type of world. So in Act 1, I want to spend a little bit of time demystifying the world, spending a little bit of time beyond the headlines. What's really going on in the world? And more importantly, what role can you play in that type of context that we find ourselves in? So one of the things that's happening at the moment is quite a bit of tension in terms of war that's playing out, in terms of challenges between countries. And people often say to me, Abdullah, is this because of Donald Trump? And I say, no. We've got to step a little bit back. And this picture perhaps best encapsulates it. In the year 2000, the US was the most dominant trade partner for almost every country across the world. 20 years later, China has eclipsed the US as the most dominant trade partner. And so when that happens, you start to appreciate that what the US is doing is trying to pull back some of the waning influence. Does that mean that the US is still not the most powerful economy in the world? Of course it is. The US contributed 26% to global GDP in 2024. It's still the most powerful economic actor. But what we're seeing in the world is a fight between two major countries, the US and China, and that's affecting all of us as countries in the next year that comes together. The second, perhaps, is the fact that in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a massive shift in terms of what I call the fracturing world order. That what happens in the Middle East has had a massive impact in terms of the price of oil and gas, and that has affected everything in terms of the cost of living, the cost of borrowing, the cost of goods and services thousands of kilometers away. But we love talking about the world from economic numbers, and sometimes we must make it real. So let me make it real. A few years ago, I hosted the Minister of Finance in a session at my business school. And the minister said to me, Abdullah, the National Treasury has done work that tells us that South Africa is a 40 by 5 world. I say, okay, Minister, what do you mean? What do you mean 40 by 5? He says 40% of South Africa's working population lives on average in 40 square meter, often informal homes, travels on average 40 kilometers to get to work, apartheid spatial planning, spends on average 40 minutes of their commute time to get to work. An inner killer spends 40% of their disposable income on transport just to get to work. So I realize we have a massive challenge, because when that price of oil goes up by 37%, the number today is 51%. So it means every cent I earn, half of it goes towards transport to get to work for the most marginalized in society. So I realize I've got to think more deeply about what does that mean. And the penny dropped for me last year. Last year I hosted the CEO of the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa, PRASA. And PRASA in 2009 was doing 687 million trips a year. They were the backbone of the South African economy. By 2017, because of crime and corruption, etc., it went down to 3.1 million trips a year. From 700 million to 3 million. Literally, the plane almost crashed, right? And they're now rebuilding it, and they're back to almost 120 million trips, and they're going to get to 200 million soon. And when I hosted the CEO, I said to him, tell me, when a plane is almost about to crash, it is very difficult, because you're rebuilding everything, from the confidence of people to the literal trains to the tracks to everything. But was there a day or couple of days where you've seen hope? He says, Abdullah, I went to reopen the Mabopane line. And when I went there, we gave the speeches. And then as I got off the podium, somebody came to me with tears in her eyes. And she said, you've changed my life. I said, what do you mean I've changed your life? She says, I used to use the train to get to work as a domestic worker. I work in Swane. It used to cost me 6 Rand 50 to go to work and 6 Rand 50 to come home. So 13 bucks a day. When the train stopped working, I had to use multiple modes of transport. And now it costs me 103 Rand a day to get to work and come back home. And you know what domestic workers earn. So she says, most of my money just goes into transport to survive. Now that you've reopened the train, it now costs me 7 Rand to go and 7 Rand to come home. I have 85 to 90 Rand back in my pocket every day, and I can use that for my family. I can use that for food. And you realize that what happens in other parts of the world almost instantaneously affects us. And that's why it matters. That's why we've got to understand it. The second, colleagues, is that it's not short term. This is a picture of population in the world. In 1960, we had 2.7 billion people in the world. Today, we've got 8.6 billion people in the world. So what have we done? We've taken the number of people and times it by 3.5. So I want you to think about your own house. Take the number of people in your house, even if you live alone, and times it by 3.5. So if you're living alone, you now have 3.5 people at your house. If you don't increase the resources and how much you earn, can you live the same life? No. It's very difficult, but that's what's happened in the world. We've got 3.5 times more people in the world, but we don't have the resources. We don't have more water. We don't have more energy. We don't have more food. We don't have more natural resources. And so what's really happening in the world is a fight for resources. That's why the world is so turbulent in where we are. That's the first. The second is the consequential effect. The consequential effect of that is that people are starting to question democracy. And in the last 10 years, 20 years, we've seen a massive increase in terms of autocracies, dictatorships. Today, 70% of society lives in autocracies. So autocracies are more dominant than democracies. And you can see the shift and change that comes together. And so when you live in a world that's so difficult to live in, when we are affected by factors outside of our influence, when we're starting to be affected and shaped by things that are outside of our control, it has an effect without a doubt in terms of our state of being. And we're in a what I call mental health tsunami. People are grappling with operating in this type of context. Why is it that the world has become so turbulent in terms of othering, in terms of not respecting some of the gains that we've had in society? And so that's the one that perhaps gives you a sense of disruption. The second is the massive acceleration of technology. And this gives you a sense of what COVID did in terms of accelerating technology. 2021, and by the way, all of these numbers have gone up. We've seen a massive shift in terms of how people adopt and use technology. To the extent that it's no more about technology. Technology has dissipated on the back end. It's the fact that technology has shifted how we think, how we behave, how we get food, how we shop, how we move, how we transport ourselves, everything. And what has happened is what I call this cognitive rewiring of human behavior. Let me explain what I mean by this is, today we send 69 million WhatsApp messages every 60 seconds. Let's be honest, WhatsApp is more than a messenger service, right? If I open somebody's WhatsApp, and if they get 2 blue ticks, and if I don't reply, they get emotions, feelings, anxiety, all of these things, right? Today we swipe 2 million times on Tinder every 60 seconds looking for a date. I met my wife on a water slide in a water park. Those days are gone, right? You don't do that anymore, right? And so part of this is to appreciate what's going on. Let me give you an example of how technology shifts the world. In 2019, I'm doing strategy for Netflix. Netflix on the back end, for every 45 seconds of viewing, when you're watching in your profile, for every 45 seconds, collects between 40 to 50,000 algorithms on the back end. So I say, okay, I'm just watching a movie, man. Like, what are you collecting? Everything from the bit rate to the scene selection to the color palette to the number of actors and actresses to how often do you watch, to what sequencing do you watch, to what times do you watch, to even when do you fall asleep. How does Netflix know when you fall asleep at your house? How?
That thing, are you still watching?
Are you still watching? So that's one way. How else? To an extent, right? So what they do is, I'm watching Suits, season 6, episode 4. I fall asleep after 17 minutes. They know this because the next time I come onto my profile and I switch on Suits, I rewind to where I think I fell asleep. And the big data pattern starts to say that in the last 6 months, we've realized Abdullah is like a 17-minute guy. And so they start to recommend, what do they do with the data? They start to recommend shorter form content to me. It informs the shows that they're going to create in the future when my data is then put into a much larger data model that says the majority of people are not able to watch what we call static shows. They want more user engaging content. So things like Selling Sunset and Dubai Bling and all of that stuff is because you feel you're part of the show, so you don't necessarily fall asleep. So I want you to think about Netflix. The back end is sophisticated, it's complex, it's got incredible machine learning capability. What's the front end like? It's simple, it's seamless, it's frictionless, it's one touch, it always works. You have no idea who to call when Netflix goes down. It's usually the fiber company, right? And so more importantly, I want you to think about the fact that 15 years ago, you would get in front of your television on a Thursday night because you couldn't miss your favorite television show. And you had 3 options. The love story between Zebediah and Agnes Matabane on Generations, Parker Haynes on Isidingo, or Seven Delan. Those were the 3 options you had. You would not even go to the bathroom because you couldn't miss it. Last night, Friday night, you'd make sure you're in front of your TV so you could watch Gem Alley and Vanolia, right? That was a life. Today, you have no idea what to watch on TV. You're overwhelmed with choice, right? You've got Amazon and Disney and Showmax and DSTV and Netflix and Disney. And most young people are watching YouTube long-form content, and there are other things that are fighting for our eyeballs. So that's this cognitive rewiring. Another example, 15 years ago, we'd dress up. We would drive 15 kilometers to go to the Mike's Kitchen or the Spur to eat a meal. Listen to 7 irritating birthday songs. Today, it is painful to go out of your couch to go to the front door to collect the Uber Eats. I know this because last night my kids were arguing at home. The Uber guy was sitting was at the door with our food, and they saying, no, I went last time, you go. So I eventually said, guys, the guy's waiting, please go. And my daughter said, Dad, you never go, can you please go? And I realized walking 10 meters to the front door is hard. That's cognitive rewiring. And we have been rewired in terms of everything, right? So that's the first thing that technology has done. But the reality is that we're now in a world where AI is starting to transform some of that in terms of its capability, and there's a negative implication. The negative implication is that we're in a what we call attention deficit society. Attention span is down to 8 seconds. People spend 4.8 hours on average on social media usage. 59% of adults say, I can't go 30 minutes without checking my phone. I need it. It's part of this ability to be able to be a very digitized society. And what happens as a result of that is that we become digital nomads in such a way that we lose the human capability. And we run the risk of becoming a little bit like what this video does.
Playing jazz.
Playing jazz.
Smoothie.
Making smoothie.
Calendar.
No meetings today. Remember, dentist at 9:30.
Fire off.
Fire off.
Open door.
Door open.
And we're gonna do one more.
Oh yeah. Open door.
Wrong voice command.
Open door.
Wrong voice command.
Open. Open door.
Repeat that.
Open door.
I didn't understand that.
Hey, open door.
Play on the floor.
Get over the door. Open the door.
Wrong voice command. Error.
Hey, William. With a rock. Open door. Open door. Higher.
Higher volume.
Higher.
Higher.
So that brings us to an important component, which is kind of where I want to go to is two things. How do you build personal strategy in a disruptive world? How do you survive but thrive in a disruptive world? And for me, there's a few things I want you to think about. The first one is that we often run our worlds, our organizations, ourselves in what I call a present forward orientation. We ask ourselves, what is it that I do? How do I sustain this of an existing paradigm in such a way that's linear and deductive and analytical? But we need to do a bit more of this year, which is what we call future back thinking. What could be? Is it possible for us to be much more transformative? Can we develop a new paradigm? Is it possible for us to be much more imaginative and creative? And let's use a very real example or case. So tell me, who competes with Woolies in the food environment? Checkers. I never have said that a few years ago, but Checkers all of a sudden has become cool. Tell me, what's the willingness to pay of Woolies? Why do you shop at Woolies in the food business? Why? Quality, right? The bananas are yellower, they taste better, they last longer, they're nicer. Okay, quality. What else? Was it? Aesthetics, right? You know the store feels nice. You go to the cashier, the person asks you, do you want a black bag? You smile and say yes. They charge you $9 for the black bag. You smile back. Woolly says to me that one of the biggest complaints they got was when the black bag became a white bag. Like, okay, it's just a bag, guys. I know it can carry a lot of money, but it's different, right? Okay, so aesthetics, right? What else? Why else do you shop at Woolies? Convenience, right? It's the fact that I can get something and heat it up, and in 5 minutes I know consistently whether I buy it here in Sunny Hill or whether I buy it at an engine in the Northern Cape, it's going to taste the same and it's going to be a good quality product, which is the product portfolio. You get sticky toffee pudding and tin roof ice cream and chuckles and everything. So Woolies did that. Woolies was never a food business. They were a mediocre clothing business. People would go there to buy pajamas and underwear and socks and slippers. There was no Trenery Country Road. It all came now. So Woolies built that. Checkers comes in and they do some of this here. They ask what could be. How do we go and really deliver value in that space? So tell me, what's the willingness to pay of Checkers? Why do people shop there? Convenience, right? Affordability. What else? 60-60. They deliver on time. They do it. They were late in the game. They partnered with a company, Zulzi, who till today is their back-end e-commerce platform. So one is that. What else? How else did Checkers rebrand themselves to be attractive that you're willing to pay for them?
Convenient for family.
Convenient for family, right? They rebuilt their stores even, right? They partnered with Jamie Oliver and Starbucks and Krispy Kreme. Their stores look different. Anybody bought clothing from Checkers? They've got a clothing store. Unique, right? I never knew about Unique, right? Last year, September, my wife comes home, we're having dinner, and she says, babe, I bought some new clothes. I said, great, where from? She says, from Checkers. I said, no. No. And we made it, man. Like, don't buy clothes from Checkers, man. And we have this argument. She's like, hey, dude, I'll buy clothes from wherever I want to buy clothes from. I'm like, no, but please, no, man. And then we don't talk to each other for 2 hours. And then I go to her. I'm like, okay, show me the clothes. And I see it. And I'm like, wow. They have built. And I buy a lot of stuff from a Unique, right? I'm saying so quickly, they fundamentally reposition their brand in where they are. Nobody imagined that you can deliver stuff in 60 minutes and actually track where the driver is going to go. Nobody imagined that they were able to build their own product portfolio, Simple Truth, Forage and Feast. So I'm saying part of this is to imagine what the future looks like and bring it in. And so I want to maybe spend the bulk of the last 15, 20 minutes on personal strategy. And I'm going to make it very personal, very anecdotal. I'm going to give you my own journey, and I think I want to do that because I don't want to talk theoretically. The first thing I often say is the opportunity of a lifetime must be taken in the lifetime of the opportunity. And those opportunities come in unique spaces that we sometimes miss. I'll tell you where mine came from. I went to a really good school out in Nelspruit in Mpumalanga. I got a scholarship to go there. And I'll never forget in grade 11, sitting in the bush in the middle of nowhere for a leadership camp. And in the middle of that week, my principal came with a piece of paper. And he said to us as the grade 11 class that we as a school have been invited to a United Nations debating competition. He says, who wants to take part? We all kept quiet. We didn't have debating at school. Then after 5 minutes of a silence, he said, okay, the next week, Thursday and Friday is the provincial competition. At that point, my brain said, Abdullah, 2 days of school, pick up your hand. I picked up my hand. I wanted to miss school, and that changed my life. The guy next to me, Tsakani, I said, Tsakani, pick up your hand. He's like, why? I said, don't care, we'll just miss school, man. So in any event, we go to the provincial competition the next day. It felt a lot like what today looks like. There were hundreds of learners, students, obviously younger, 16, 17, but really a movement of young people who came to participate in this UN program at the provincial parliament. So hundreds of schools. In any event, we participate. The way the UN partnered was they partnered 2 kids from a resource school, 2 from an under-resource. So we were a team of 4, but there were hundreds of teams. Somehow we fluked this thing and we won the provincial competition, which meant that 2 months later we were representing Mpumalanga at the national conference in Cape Town. And I had never been on an aeroplane in my life. If you're in a family where you're the first cousin on an airplane, you have like family you don't know exists come to your house. People give you food to fly to Cape Town, but it's like I'm just flying for 2 hours, but they give you food for days, man. So in any event, I go to Cape Town. I've never been on an aeroplane, never been to Cape Town, and I arrive there, and it's big, man. We meet teams from all over the country and the province, the continent, and we participate. Cut a long story short, the way this program works is from the hundreds of thousands of kids, they select at this national conference the winning provincial team of 4 learners and 1 from each of the remaining 8 provinces. I get selected from Mpumalanga to represent the country at a global conference the next year in New York. So for missing a day of school, all of a sudden, in a few months later, I'm literally in New York. I'm at 7th Avenue, I'm at Starbucks. I've gone from never being flying in my life to flying 16 hours to America. It's big. And I also, on that program, meet a girl from the Eastern Cape, Nobisa Mayema. And we become very close friends to the point that we create an organization called the Collective Genius that ended up running programs like this and many other youth programs. So that's the one effect. The second effect is that the South African team wins a global speaking award. I come home, I put my head down, I get very good marks in matric. And after celebrating my results, my parents call me and say, we have a problem. I say, what? They say, we don't have money for university fees. So I say, what are we going to do? My dad says, we'll have to make a plan. And it was tough. So I was going out with a girl in Witbank where my parents are living. It was like a holiday fling. We're going out for 3 weeks. And I go to her. I say to her, look, I know your dad's got 2 shops here in Witbank. Do you think your father can help pay for my university fees? I had blessers before they became famous, right? She says, Abdullah, my dad doesn't know you, doesn't know I'm going out with you. Please leave me, my father, my family alone. It's over between us. Okay. I go to her father's shop the next day. I don't tell him I know his daughter, but I tell him my story. He says, I can't pay your university fees, but I'm going to help you. How much is registration? I say, 2,500. So he takes out $3,000. He gives it to me. 2 of my friends drop me in Johannesburg, and damn, I've arrived. I have a student card. I have a student number. My card works. My photo is there. Except 2 days later, I realize I'm in trouble. I don't have food. I don't have a place to stay. And I don't have fees. So I start looking for a job. And yes, I find a job. I find a job selling recharge vouchers, those scratch cards. I am allocated Northwest and Limpopo. So what happens is I pick up the cards on a Monday morning. I drive to one of the two provinces and I go town to town. I go to spaza shops and quick shops and filling stations selling these recharge vouchers. And I would make 2% as a profit, and that's how I would do. And I was doing okay. For 3 years, I actually was doing well. I was a full-time student and I had a full-time job. So I was the guy who'd come to you like 2 days before the semester test or exam, ask you for your notes. I'd skim those notes quickly, and I just needed to be a cum laude student. For me, cum laude was 51%. I promise you, if I got 55, I'd celebrate it, right? I just needed to be honest with myself. And life was good, except in my third year, I picked up lots of vouchers. I was in Polokwane that week. I came back on the Thursday evening, very close to where we are today, and I went to the Chicken Licken. I was young and naive. And I had all the money under my car seat and all the remaining cards. When I came out of the Chicken Licken, somebody had broken into my car and stolen everything. And remember, the value is big, the profit small. So I lost everything. So the next day I go to my manager, Mark. I tell him, Mark, this is what's happened. He says, Abdullah, I need to let you go. You have to sign an acknowledgement of debt. The problem now is I'm the first in my family to study. I'm the first in my community to study. So I'm not going home. So I remain in Johannesburg, except 2 months later I get kicked out of my flat for not paying rent. I get kicked out of university for not paying fees, excluded as they called it. And I was in trouble. But because of that decision in the bush, I'm very active on the Student Representative Council. So I get a call from the Dean of Students, Professor Deyaga. He calls me and he says, Abdullah, I need to see you urgently. And you know, SRC students put up some fake power. I say, look, Prof, please make an appointment to see me. Man, he says, before I do that, I'm getting campus security to take you off campus because you're not even a student here. At that point, I ran to his office. I begged his forgiveness. He says, it's fine, don't worry. Put his arm around me. He walked me to the fees office. He got me a NSFAS loan. And that day, my life changed. So remember, the decision in the bush, missing a day of school affects everything that comes in. In fact, I became a lawyer. That was my life. And then I hated being a lawyer. And so I went to my UN tutor and I told him about my story that ended up in the career that I'm doing now. So that's the first. The opportunity of a lifetime must be taken in the lifetime of the opportunity. The second is you've got to flip the VUCA. Yes, the world is volatile, and yes, it's uncertain, and yes, it's complex, and yes, it's ambiguous. But as Gert Leonhard beautifully puts it, he says when the world is volatile, you have to respond with velocity. You've got to be faster, quicker, more responsive in terms of what's going on. He says when things are uncertain, you have to be unorthodox. That means you have to swim against the grain. Every successful company, organization, individual has done things that are unorthodox. Lincoln Mali is a great financial services leader who's done amazing work in his life. He took a decision to fundamentally impact young people, and you can see what the result of that is. That's unorthodox. That is not required of him to do. And so unorthodox means swim against the grain. The third one is complexity. When things are complex, you have to co-create. And again, today is an example of co-creation. We've got a multitude of so many incredible young leaders, so many incredible participants and facilitators, and that's what co-creation does. If this had me and one of you only, we wouldn't have been able to create the energy. And so I'm saying think of co-creation. And the last one, he says, when things are ambiguous, you have to be awesome. And awesome's the small stuff. How do you come across? How do you position your brand? How do you think about your network? Who do you surround yourself with? And so secondly, flip the VUCA. The third one is you have to be able to spend the time to think differently. I often say we're great on return on assets, return on capital, return on investment, return on equity, but we don't spend time on the most valuable currency, which is return on time. And when you don't spend your time on the things that matter, you end up doing drift work, that is lots of busyness, but no real focus. I've come to learn that with all the technology we have, we don't have the time to actually focus on what matters. Why? Because everybody wants a piece of us. You get copied in emails that have got nothing to do with you. You get invited to meetings and you park there and you're like, why am I here? Like sometimes you're in a day-long meeting and you only have to speak for 2 minutes. And you're like, but no, when I could have done something else in the space, right? And you realize that you have to spend a focus on return on time. Again, I learned this the hard way. In 2023, I'm doing strategy for a very large organization in Magaliesburg. For some reason, everybody thinks strategy must be done in Magaliesburg. And so any event, I spend the 2 days, I come home, I play PlayStation with my kids, I have great dinner, and then I go to sleep. That night at 11:37, I wake up with pain I've never had in my whole life. So I can't breathe, I'm struggling, and I wake my wife up, and I joke a lot. So she's like, Abdullah, it's midnight, leave me alone, and she goes to sleep. I'm like, oh damn, I have to wake up again. So now I'm struggling. So I wake up, and she realizes this guy's in trouble. Rushes me to Mill Park Hospital. I go through the emergency casualty room. I'm struggling even to get through the 30 minutes of forms being filled out, and then the emergency doctor sees me. And she's become one of my best friends since this. Apparently, she said to me, well, she did, I remember saying this to me, and then I forgot. I don't remember much after that. She says to me, I think you're having a heart attack. And I said to her, okay, I am with a very large mobile phone company board and exco tomorrow. Can you just fix me quickly? I can go there for 2 days and I'll come back on Saturday to do a proper job. And she said, best you tell them you ain't coming, my friend. And I remember at 5 o'clock in the morning being on the phone with the CEO. And he says to me, Abdullah, I'm cancelling the strategy. I said, no. One swallow doesn't make a summer. One of my senior partners will be there. My team will be there. And he, to cut a long story short, I didn't have a heart attack. I had a massive lung issue. I was in hospital for 3 weeks. I was out for 3.5 months, and I learned some hard lessons. The one lesson I learned is I need to be deliberate in terms of where I'm spending my time and where I'm not spending my time. It means that sometimes the things that seem nice to me, I need to say no to because they don't fill my strategy of where I need to do and not do. The second is I need to make a decision where I'm going to be, then I be all in. So if I've made a decision that on this Saturday morning I'm going to be here, then best I think about how I land it, what I need to do, and not just give you a generic perspective. The third thing I've realized is that if I put 11 Messis or 11 Ronaldos or 11 Mbappes on the field, they will not win a game. You are great as a striker, but you need to be honest that you're not a midfielder, you're not a defender, you're not a goalkeeper, you're not a coach. And so I've come to learn what am I good at and who do I surround myself with who are good and even better in other spaces. Because we think we can be everything to everybody. So that's the second in terms of return on time that comes together. And Warren Buffett beautifully puts it. He says the difference between successful and really successful people is that really successful people say no to almost everything. The third one is this ability to appreciate that it is very easy to be able to think that I've got a piece of paper in a university and I've arrived and I now can stop learning and I can work. That's how we've been conscientized. Study until the age of 22, 23 and then work for the rest of your life. And unfortunately, I've come to learn that you have to stay curious and not certain. That means you've got to do things that put you in an uncomfortable zone. I always say to marketing people or finance people or operations people or HR people go to HR conferences to talk about HR with other HR people to learn more about HR on stuff they know already. HR people need to go and spend time with finance people or marketing people. Finance people need to take the finance hat off sometimes and go and spend time with brand people because that's where we learn. Now, you've got to drive new routes to work. You've got to talk to people who make you uncomfortable. Because that's how we get to the discomfort of being curious. So this is, how do you read outside your lane? How do you ask questions that make you uncomfortable? How do you turn experiences that you've had in your life into insight that comes together? The third one is you have to build your network before you need it. And it is incredible in terms of how you have to think about building network. And I often say, the biggest component of this is the first question is how do you add value first? It's very easy to just say, can you mentor me? And can I, but you have to understand how do you build a reciprocity in the relationship. So that means how do you stay visible without being noisy? How do you protect your reputation? This is what real network looks like and feels like in where we are. The fifth one is really dear to me. Professor Linda Hill at Harvard has this amazing book called The Collective Genius, and she shared this with me. She says we have three sources of intelligence. One is analytical thinking, how you think, your headspace, strategy, positioning, white space, capabilities, performance, return. She says a second source of intelligence is what she called gut instinct. She says don't take this the wrong way. This is your lived experience, your skills, your creativity, your expertise, not what you studied, not what you think you're good at, but what is it that innately makes you unique? The third, she says, is your passion. So what is it that drives your behavior, your teamwork, your action, your collaboration, etc.? She says all three are equally important. But the way we live our lives in the workplace is we think analytical thinking is the be-all and end-all. She says it's like you go to gym for 5 years and you do your arms for 5 years and you come out on the other side and tell me what you look like. That's how we live our life. And I didn't realize this until I deeply got affected by this. So when COVID hit, I had a portfolio career, which I still have. And I realized that despite having a portfolio career, I was in a lot of trouble during COVID. So let me give you a sense. One, I run a strategy firm. We employ 30 odd people. And every single strategy between March 2020 and May got cancelled. So literally everything cancelled. Number two, I teach at business school, some here, some in the US. I'll never forget in April on a Saturday afternoon teaching to 71 MBA students and only 2 had their cameras on. Everybody's camera don't work, the network isn't good. And I remember every single question is answered by one person in class. So I remember on a Saturday afternoon switching off, I called the dean of the school and I said, look, I can't talk to myself for the entire weekend, so I'm done teaching this stuff. When we come back to the room, I'll be in the room, but for now, I'm out of the system. I'll teach this class finish tomorrow, but I can't do this. It's not working for me. Number 3, I do some keynote talks like what I'm doing here. I had 64 in my diary for 2020-21, all got cancelled. Number 4, I sit on some boards. One of the boards I sit on, the chairman of the company refuses to use technology. He doesn't want to invest in it. We had to have an emergency board meeting in May 2020. The guy borrows his granddaughter's iPad, comes on this emergency board meeting, and the man talks to himself for 17 minutes. None of us can get hold of him on his phone. He calls me. He says, Abdullah, I'm talking and talking. Nobody listens to me. I said, you need to unmute your microphone, man. And I'll never forget the guy. I have him on my phone. He throws the iPad in the air as I see him on my screen. And he says, Abdullah wants me to buy a microphone when Incredible Connections close. I realized that's done. And then lastly, I own a number of motoring businesses, 50% of them, and some travel businesses. So the motoring business I started in 2016 when a friend of mine who was single mom moved to Johannesburg when he was very young. We met in 2010 on pilgrimage and we became very, very close friends. So in 2016, we're in the US and I said to him, I love cars, you in the industry, why don't we open a disruptive motor dealership? And we did that in 2016. We did some weird stuff. We overspent the capex. I'll never forget, we bought a Pepper robot in France. We programmed it and API integrated to all the banks, all the motoring journals. You can walk into our dealership. Our first one was, and it's still there, it's on the corner of Grayson and Catherine. You can walk in there, the robot will greet you, ask you some questions, take you to the ideal car for you, even start to pre-populate your finance application. That robot eventually costed us 281,000 euros. That irritating robot doesn't do the job. Why? Nobody wants to buy a car from a robot. That was my romantic, idealistic vision of the world. So that robot does one job today. On a Saturday morning like today, it high-fives kids. That's the only job it does. And even the kids get irritated with it because it takes 11 seconds for its hand to come up. So we overspent the capex, right? In any event, people can tell you that strategy is all fancy words and we can teach you for 5 days at a business school. At the heart, business is money in versus money out. You need more money to come in than money to go out. We were employing 137 people. We had expensive cars, expensive real estate, and we were in level 5 lockdown, which means nobody was buying cars from us. We were not allowed to be open. And so we decided not to lay off anybody, which is idealistic, but in reality, in all my businesses, we were in trouble. And then I realized I had signed personal surety for all my assets, my wife's assets, when we opened this business for some facilities we took. So we were in deep trouble. And I then remember sitting in my room at the end of May, and I then called the CEO of a very prominent bank, and I said to him, look, you've always said to me I must come be on your exco. And I've always said no, but I'm ready to be on your exco now. And he said, Abdullah, your timing's bad, but let's see. The next day, him and the chairman of the board and the head of HR called me. They offered me a very cool role. I even looked at what he earns on the REM report, and I said, if I come close, it'll take me about 7 years to get back to zero, literally to pay back everything we were losing. So I go to my wife, who's a chartered accountant, manages our finances. I said, babe, you know we're in trouble. She's like, yeah, I know, we don't sleep at night, dude. I say, okay, I have a plan. We'll close everything. We'll stop doing what I do. And I will become an executive in this bank. And it'll take us 7 years to go back to zero, but we just have to survive. And she said, stop being dramatic. I'm like, dude, you don't understand, we're in trouble. She says, no, maybe it's time you practice what you preach. At that point, you say to your wife, don't get Barry White on me, man. Like, not now, not here, not the place, not the time. So in any event, she says, give me the CEO's number. She calls him. He still laughs about it. She said to him, Abdullah is not coming to work for you. She changed our bank account passwords. And to a large extent, we survived. In fact, we thrived. My strategy business has grown 5x in turnover. Our car business, I realized, and this is where I realized I had broken these two things in those 8 weeks. How? Well, my partner, as I said, he owns 50% and he runs the business, calls me in 2022 February. He says, Abdullah, I want us to open a new business. We've come out of COVID, we're doing okay. I said, what business? He said, there are these new Chinese cars called Cherry. I said, no, not our business, not our space, not our LSM. I use very fancy MBA words. He says, please, man. I said, no, we're not doing it. When you romantically open a business, you don't realize what happens when you're 50-50 and you don't agree. There's no deciding vote. You can't flip a coin, man. So we don't talk for 2 weeks. Eventually, our wives bring us together. He comes to the meeting, says, Abdullah, please let's do this. I'll cover your 50% if it goes wrong. I'll put it in writing. So we do it. And today, we now own 41 of these different dealerships right across the country. Not only Chinese, but other brands. The same bugger calls me in 2023. He says, Abdullah, I want us to open another business. I say, what? He says, an armored business. I'm like, what is an armored business, dude? He says, we take these cars, like an X5 or whatever, we armor it. We build a facility that armors the car so no bullet can go through it. So now I get one cleverer. I take my strategy team to Magaliesburg. I tell him why this is a shit decision, right? So we put the best data out there. We tell him why the GDP of the country doesn't allow for people to spend 1.25 million just to armor a car. It's not going to work, man. So I come to the guy. I start presenting my slides. After 2 minutes, he's like, Abdullah, please leave the academic mumbo jumbo here. We're opening this business, man. I feel it, man. Again, I'm like, dude, I don't want to do it. He says, I'll cover you, man. And we opened, and last year we sold 241 cars. We could only deliver 165. We can't keep up with the demand. It was at that point I realized I've always been an entrepreneur, but I've lost it because circumstances took it away. So in my head, I thought we survived it. Everything's amazing. We've never done so well financially and personally. We have so many of these businesses. My strategy business is doing well. I'm teaching at business schools. And so the last 18 months for me has been to rebuild my nervous system, has been to rebuild my entrepreneurial flair. And I share this with you because not everything that you've had in your life has been rosy tinted and a great story. You might have had a toxic boss. You might have had failures somewhere in your experience. We might all come from tough backgrounds. Our responsibility is not to hide it away. Our responsibility is to heal from it, the trauma of it. Because if you don't do it, you'll never become the best version of yourself. And it is about being honest about it. We come from a generation before us that feels that it's not something we should be focusing on because we must survive. And I said to my parents a few years ago, we have to deal with it because it is what makes us stronger in where we are. And lastly, as I close, we live in a wild country, right? When the Daily Sun tells us a man kills himself and runs away, you realize that we have to do a bit more deeper work in terms of why I feel it's magical to live in a country like ours. And I promise you, having traveled in so many countries, I always come back here because there's never been such a beautiful environment that we find ourselves in where we are. Thank you so much.
My name is Omar. I currently serve as a technical advisor to the Minister of Youth and Sports in Mozambique. And I'm also the founder of the UGP, mission-driven consulting firm. Can I stand up?
Please.
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
Just straight to the point
Yes.
question. Yeah.
Yes. It's just very, very basic question. What would you say has been your most proud moment throughout your career, and why?
Yeah. I think for me it was the day I taught at Harvard Business School. It came full circle because when I got kicked out of varsity, I became very anti the academic world, and selfishly so, because I felt it had done me a disservice. It's amazing to be back to have a leg in academia, to be able to teach, to be able to contribute, and so sitting in a classroom that has such global appeal was probably like the pinnacle. Yeah, 100%.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and the beautiful session on personal strategy. So I loved what you shared at the end around entrepreneurship, especially with the armoring business. So what was interesting is that you came with the statistics, the market research, the academia. and your business partner came in with, I have a gut feeling. Yes. So how does one bridge the gap between making a business decision, a sound business decision, and using either your gut feeling to say I feel it and the actual market-related statistics?
Beautiful. Jeff Bezos from Amazon said it's not either or. He talks about algorithms and andronyms. He says all of our important decisions at Amazon were taken because the data told us that. But he says my most important decisions were taken on heart and gut and intuition. So it's not an either or. They're both important. You can overanalyze the data and in the process become so risk averse that you actually don't take the opportunity. Or you can just be wild and not think about the implication. You have to find the balance between the two, which is important. Yeah.
Dr. Abdullah, my question is, how did you pivot from law to strategy, and what tips would you give to someone who wants to follow a similar path?
Yeah, so my kids often say to me, why did you become a lawyer? I said, I probably watched the equivalent of Suits back in the day. The cars look good, the girls look good, the officers look good, the lawyers are doing cool work. I wanted to be like a Harvey Specter kind of guy. I did my articles, got admitted as an attorney, and I realized this is not what I want to do in my life. And you know what is bad, right? I mean, your whole family now they're celebrating, this guy's a lawyer, man, my son's a lawyer. And you're like, but I don't want to be a lawyer, man. And it was my first year of marriage, 2008, right? And I remember going to my wife and saying, dude, I know I'm a lawyer, but I don't want to do this thing, man. I then, as I said, went to my UN tutor. He introduced me to a guy who was starting a corporate finance firm. We were in the right place at the right time. And we built it into something amazing. We sold to Deloitte 7 years later. Part of that was just making the jump. If you ask me now, would I do it now? Maybe not, right? But at that time, I was young, I was hungry, I was ambitious. And in my belly, I knew, man, I can't do this. Weirdly, last year, the law firm I did my articles with, I'm now doing their strategy. And I remember sitting with them and saying, I used to be here, but the experience I had with one of the partners when I was doing my articles was so bad that I just exited the system. And we're now on a journey of managing the culture dynamics of how do you manage a generation that might not have been brought up like you, who wants to spend 25 years before they become a partner. Yeah.
So yesterday I got challenged by my coach, and I also want to pick your brain around visibility, relevant visibility, being a leader, being a future leader. What is your 1 or 2 points to say yes or no to opportunity? And yeah, as you said, it started at school now, 10 years later, but now it's coming at a pace where you can't really keep up or really make that instinct decision. So relevant visibility, what is visibility to you and as a leader?
Sure. So, Ayanda and I were talking earlier, and one of the things I often get asked is, why do you not like being in the media? Why do you not like having too much of an active voice? And I said, sometimes I have to say what fits within my virtuous cycle. What is it that matters to me? What is it that I'm good at? What is it that energizes me? What is it that earns me a good income? And what is it that contributes to society? And for me, if it fits within that bucket, then I give it the attention. It is very easy to get caught up in vibes. So in my world, there are lots of vibes. What I mean by this is, I'll give you an example. Last year, I'm in the Netherlands doing 2 days of strategy with a bank. On the Friday, because I do so much work in the sporting industry, I get a call from UEFA saying, there's a European Championship tomorrow. We know you in Europe. Why don't you just fly to Germany and come and watch the semi-finals with us? And I said no. 10 years ago, I would have jumped at it, right? So what did I come home for? I came home just to play hide and seek with my kids and just to chill. And in my brain, you'd think that's not logical, Abdullah. Yes, it is, because my decision is this is where I want to spend my time. This is what matters to me. So you need to separate the vibes and the nice stuff with what is it that truly is feeding where you want to be and what matters to you. Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate it. All right, then.